The brutal perpetrator behind the infamous Black Dahlia murder in 1947 was able to avoid police for more than 50 years. The Black Dahlia case images from 1947 were blurry and hard to see, but AI augmentation has revealed frightening new information. Detectives can now see marks they didn't see previously. There was a reason why her body was in that position. It needed medical training and excellent surgical abilities. The cuts were too neat, too exact, and the placement too good. This is something that only someone with years of training could do. When detectives compared the improved pictures to medical books from the 1930s, they found a perfect match. It was someone the police might have kept safe. On July 29, 1924, Elizabeth Short was born in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. From the outside, her family looked regular. In the 1920s, her father, Cleo, made a lot of money by establishing miniature golf courses. Those mini courses were very popular in the US at the time, and people liked them. It looked like her family had everything. But everything changed quickly. In 1929, when Elizabeth was 5 years old, the stock market fell and Cleo lost everything. Something far worse happened a year later. Cleo traveled to the Charlestown Bridge in 1930 and left his car there, making it look like he had leaped off and murdered himself. No, he didn't. He just disappeared, leaving his wife and 5 girls behind. They thought he was dead for a long time. They had what they assumed was his funeral. But Cleo was alive in California, beginning again as if none of them cared. Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, wouldn't take him back when he finally wrote to them. But Elizabeth never let go. She kept writing him letters, as if she still sought his affection or aid in the future. That moment affected her life forever. She never really got over that kind of betrayal. Her upbringing didn't become any easier. She had a lot of trouble breathing. Asthma and bronchitis made winters in Massachusetts practically lethal. Doctors chopped into her lungs to help her breathe when she was only 15. She would always have scars from that surgery. When she was 16 in 1940, physicians eventually told her she couldn't live in the cold. She had to go. That's when she began spending the winter with family friends in Miami. She never returned to school. That illness changed everything. It made her look weak, like a ghost. But it also made her look dreamy, something people never forgot. She was always running away from something, whether sickness, pain, the cold, or the past. Her mother Phoebe was a bookkeeper in Massachusetts during the Great Depression. She was struggling to feed 5 kids by herself. They moved out of their house and into a modest apartment in Medford. Elizabeth went to Medford High School, where her friends called her Medford High's Deanna Durbin. Elizabeth held on to that nickname like it meant she might be someone else, even though Deanna was a famous actress at the time. Those notes are all over her high school autograph book. She didn't simply watch movies, she lived in them. She would tell people she was going to movie auditions when she wasn't. She thought Hollywood could save her. She started working at a Florida medicine store in 1940, the same year she dropped out of school. Betty was what her friends called her. But that store wasn't just a job. It was her stage, her practice space, and her mirror. She experimented on several outfits and looks. She donned black outfits and long gloves, and instead of saving money, she spent it all on clothes. The change from sick girl to beautiful young woman wasn't because she was vain. It was to stay alive. People saw her. She got people's attention. She looked like she belonged in a black and white movie even before she arrived to Hollywood. Then came the shock that opened up her oldest wound. A letter came in December 1942. It was from Cleo, the man who pretended to kill himself 13 years ago. He was still alive and living in Vallejo, California, where he worked at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Elizabeth now went to be with him. She must have thought that would make everything better. It didn't work. He didn't desire a girl. He wanted a servant. He thought she would cook and clean while he was at work. But Elizabeth had already lived by herself. She was no longer that kind of girl. She stayed up late. She went out with others. She had dreams. Cleo didn't like that. He told her she was lazy and kicked her out a few weeks later. In the month of January 1943, she was alone again. That was the last break. Elizabeth didn't have a home. She didn't have a job, any savings, or a place to stay that was stable. She started staying with other individuals, but only for short periods of time. One time, a family found her sleeping in a movie theater and allowed her remain for a bit. But even they told her to go in the end. She had bad habits. They didn't expect her to be like that. So she continued going. She survived by being beautiful. Food, beds, and favors. It all relied on how well she could make someone like her. But there was a girl behind the gorgeous face who had been left behind over and over again. Now she didn't sure where she fit in. She got to Camp Cook, a military base near Lompoc, on January 29, 1943, and got a position as a cashier at the PX. Inez Keeling, the woman in charge, remarked that Elizabeth was quiet but beautiful. The soldiers fell in love with her blue eyes and voluptuous body. She was named Camp Cutie of the Week in February, and her picture was in the base paper. But that didn't last long either. She left after only a few weeks. People alleged that a sergeant she lived with had hurt her. She ran again. She was detained in Santa Barbara in September 1943 for drinking alcohol when she was too young. A policewoman arrested her when she was 19 and sitting in a bar. That's when the famous mugshot was taken, the one when she appeared both defiant and broken. The officer who arrested her felt bad for her and allowed her stay at her home for 9 days. Elizabeth said no when the authorities tried to send her back to Massachusetts. Instead, she headed to Florida. Elizabeth Short was only 21 years old in 1945. She didn't have any money, a place to live, or a clear idea of what to do next. People noticed one thing about her right away: her face. She resorted to the one thing that offered her hope: photos of pinups. She kept coming back for photo shoots with Arthur James, and each time she wore the same clothing. There were instances when she didn't eat. There were times when she seemed really tired. But she smiled, posed, and did her best to look like she belonged in Hollywood. James later reported that she never requested for money. She only wanted the appropriate people to view the pictures. She hoped they would help her get in. The pictures got bolder as time went on. Not scandalous, but definitely bolder. Not because she wanted to, but only because she had to, since she was losing her grip and she knew it. Years later, those identical pictures would be used as proof after she died. But in 1945, they were her last opportunity. She didn't have an agency. She didn't know anyone. She had the Brown Derby. The restaurant with the curved roof that everyone knows about opened in 1929. By the time Elizabeth started hanging out there in 1945, it was full of producers, performers, and gossip columnists like Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper. She would sit at the bar or in the dining room, and she would often dress as well as she could. But she didn't have much money. A man she had recently met would usually pay for her food. She was nice and pleasant. People enjoyed talking to her. But deep inside, she was afraid. Later, police found 75 men's names in her address book. She met most of them at that restaurant. A few people gave her food. Some people let her stay in their apartments. That was how she stayed alive. She was sometimes entirely out of money. Then, out of nowhere, she'd have money again. Vince Carter, a former officer, said that she never worked but always found a way to get by. But that kind of living was not stable. One bad move. One wrong person. That was all it would take. The screen test came next. Her best opportunity. The time that hurt her the most. It happened in 1945, the same year she shot the pictures of herself. She was able to audition for a big studio. But it came apart quickly after she started. The directors were very open. They informed her she wasn't trained. There was something odd with her voice. Her acting didn't seem real. They told her she shouldn't be in front of the camera. She had never been to drama school, had never been on stage, and had only dropped out of high school with a gorgeous face and a dream. Everything changed after the rejection. She started to pull away more. She began to drink more. She spent more time with men who promised her stuff but never followed through. She no longer had any confidence. She became more and more desperate. And she was much more ready to trust the wrong people. Then the murmurs started, and they weren't just whispers, they were full-blown headlines. People said she was a prostitute, that she sold herself to stay alive, and that she lived a double life. But the fact was different from what others said. Later FBI investigations showed that there was no proof that she had ever been a prostitute. That was backed up by grand jury testimony. There were speculations that emerged from a 1977 book called True Confessions that changed some elements of her life into something harsher. But even if the claims weren't true, they remained. People wanted something bad to happen. And Elizabeth, even after she died, was the perfect target. It was easier and sadder than that. She took gifts from men who were interested in her. They gave her money, bought her food, and allowed her remain for a few nights. They looked for something in return at times. They didn't always. But it wasn't a business. It was about staying alive. And they even used that against her after she died. She met him right before the war was about to end. Elizabeth Short saw Major Matthew Michael Gordon, Jr. for the first time on New Year's Eve 1944 on Miami Beach. He was already a hero at 23. Already hurt from fighting. He flew more than 50 combat flights and shot down 2 Japanese Zeros in the air. Elizabeth had no idea that a casual meeting at a party would lead to the closest thing to real love she would ever have. They wrote to one another all the time after that night. Matthew wrote to his mother and said, "In 11 days, she wrote me 27 letters." That's how strong it was. At the time, he was in India getting better after a plane tragedy. He couldn't stop thinking about her, even though he was hurt. He asked her to marry him in one of those letters. She said yes. She wrote to him with so much feeling that it came out like something too large to hold back. She said, "Darling, when you get home, I'm never going to let you go." But he never returned home. His plane crashed again on August 10, 1945, only one day before he was supposed to go back to her and less than a week before Japan gave up. He didn't make it this time. He was 26 years old. Elizabeth got a short, angry telegram from his mother. Matt died in a plane disaster on his way home from India. We are very sorry for your loss. I hope it's not true. But it was real. And all of Elizabeth's things. She didn't return to her family. She floated. The sadness made her holy. The girl who used to write letters full of optimism now went aimlessly from place to place, lost in the silence he left behind. She was in Southern California by July 1946. She went there for Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling, another man. They had also met in Florida during the war. He was currently stationed in Long Beach. There was a lot of stress in their relationship. She still wanted affection, but she also needed someone to pay attention to her. Fickling was wounded because she was charming other men. He still didn't leave. They kept trying, meeting, and writing. On January 8, 1947, she sent him her last letter. She told him that she wanted to move to Chicago and work as a model. He got that letter the day before she went missing. That was the last time anyone heard from her. There was a lot of commotion in her last months. She didn't have any money. She didn't have a place to live. She went from one part of Los Angeles to another. She lived in a small Hollywood apartment with 8 other females from November 13 to December 15, 1946. The rent was low, yet it was still too much for her. She would hide from the landlord because she was frightened he would ask for money. She borrowed money, clothes, and lipstick. She held on to her features like they were all she had left. She would charm people into letting her stay or talk her way out of paying. But eventually, they'd tell her to go. She always did, and now she's alone again. People claimed she was lovely and shy and didn't drink. But something did alter. People who knew her in those last months offered a different narrative. She began to drink a lot. People saw her with various men virtually every night, and occasionally more than one at a time. People were talking quietly. They stated she had sex with males who were already married. They remarked that women didn't believe her. Her old supervisor from Camp Cook even noticed. Elizabeth didn't go out at first. After that, she began to visit soldiers a few times a week. People labeled the silent girl a man-eater. It could have been sadness. Perhaps it was to stay alive. It may have been both. But in the end, it seemed like she was losing her mind, looking for something in the eyes of strangers that she had once found in a letter from India but would never find again. In July 1946, she moved to Los Angeles with hopes that were bigger than her baggage. She wasn't just looking for parts. She was after a notion, a sensation, or maybe even a name in lights. But all she could find was a job as a waitress. She worked overnight to get recognized, hoping someone would offer her more than just a dish to carry. There was nothing spectacular about her room. It was behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard, where the noise never actually ceased. People saw her a lot. Jack Egger, the head usher at CBS Columbia Square Playhouse, said he saw her at least 20 times. She might have been watching the performers. She might have been hoping that someone would look into her. She never made tapes to show off her work. In Chicago, she never signed any modeling contracts. Elizabeth Short, a young woman, was dropped off outside the Grand Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles by her boyfriend on the night of January 9, 1947. Robert Manley, who was married and only 25 years old, was the man. Elizabeth was all in black. Her coat was a light brown color. The width of her purse was 12 inches. It had her address book in it. People saw her making phone calls in the lobby of the hotel. She looked like she was worried. At 6:30 p.m., the hotel staff remembered how tense she appeared. Someone said they spotted her again that night at a nearby club that served cocktails. But after that, no one ever saw her again. It had been 6 days. Then the tragedy happened. A lady and her young daughter were walking across an empty lot in Limerick Park on January 15, 1947, at about 10 a.m. She noticed something in the grass. She felt it was a fake person. But when she drew closer, her legs froze. The body that was laying there had been chopped in half. There was no blood. The skin was a ghostly white color. The arms were up over the head. The legs were apart. The top half and the bottom half were exactly 1 foot apart. The intestines had been taken out and put under the body. Someone had planned everything out very well. She called the cops. People would always remember what they found. On January 22, an autopsy was done. The name of the doctor was Frederick Newbar. What he found out was scary. The murderer had slashed deep into both sides of Elizabeth's mouth. They went all the way to her ears, making her smile and look twisted. They cut flesh off of her thighs and chest. They found something within her tummy that astonished everyone. There were a lot of human poop in there. That meant she had to swallow it before she died. They died from a mix of losing blood and becoming hurt in the brain. Someone had cut her face. She had a heavy knock to the head. Before she died, she had lost 25% of her blood. The rest was drained after that. Gasoline had been used to wash her body. The killer wanted more than just to kill her. He wanted to get rid of all the evidence. People didn't even use her true name anymore. The papers gave her a name. People called her the Black Dahlia. It all started when some men at a drugstore in Long Beach compared her to a movie called The Blue Dahlia. She always dressed in black. She had black hair. Her skin was light. The name was used in news stories. It was in more than 500 stories in less than a month. Before that, the media had termed it the murder of a werewolf. But the name Black Dahlia stayed. It made Elizabeth a symbol of Hollywood's worst secrets instead of a real person. An envelope came to the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper 9 days after the body was recovered, on January 24. It was made out of manila paper. There were letters taken out of magazines on the front. They said, "Here is Dahlia's letter with her things." Her personal things were in the envelope, including her birth certificate, photos, pieces of paper with names on them, and her black address book. Mark Hansen was the name on the book. Some of the pages were missing. She cleaned everything with gasoline, just like she did her body. Someone had called the newspaper 3 days before and said they were the killer. He said he would send gifts. He did what he said he would do. The cops recovered fingerprints on the mail, but they got messed up as they were being sent. They weren't able to use them. The police started one of the greatest investigations Los Angeles has ever seen. More than 750 police officers were involved. They asked more than 150 males questions. A few were doctors. A few were crooks. Some of them were strangers. One study indicated there were 316 people who might be guilty. They nabbed 50 of them. No one was charged. They looked in storm drains. They looked in residences that were empty. They even glanced along the river. Nothing worked. A member of the city council offered a reward of $10,000. That would be more than $140,000 in today's money. But no one told the truth. One individual stood out more than the rest. Dr. George Hodel was his name. He was a great surgeon. He got his medical degree in 1936. He had an IQ of 186. Later, his son Steve Hodel became a detective. He saw something that made him uneasy. George had learned how to do surgery on Elizabeth's body in the 1930s. The district attorney put wiretaps in George Hodel's house in the early 1950s. What they recorded was very frightening. People heard George say, "What if I did kill the Black Dahlia?" They couldn't prove it now. "They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she died." Ruth Spaulding, the secretary, had died from an overdose that no one knew about. She might have known too much. The DA said that George knew Elizabeth, but he was never charged. People all around the country started to confess as the case went on. More than 60 people said they killed Elizabeth. There were 19 official records. A few were women. One woman called the police and stated, "I just stabbed a girl. I killed Elizabeth Short." The cops didn't trust her. A other man said he had gone out with her in 1941, although she was just 16 and lived on the East Coast at the time. A different man worked for a real estate company that was connected to a card found in her purse. None of their stories were true, but their lies cost a lot of time. Then something far worse happened. A grand jury found out in 1949 that the Los Angeles Police Department was very corrupt. They learned that high-ranking officers were collecting money from criminals like Mickey Cohen. There was a ring of prostitutes that made thousands of dollars every day. The LAPD's vice unit was in charge of keeping it safe. One cop was collecting $50 for every girl who worked. In today's money, that's $56,000 a week. The incident made the police chief step down on June 30, 1949. A number of officers were accused of lying under oath. Everything was ruined by the corruption. It had also affected the Dahlia case. Things that proved something were missing. Witnesses were told to be quiet. The detectives were stopped. The DA had prepared a confidential list of 22 people who might be guilty. George Hodel was on that list, although there were more people on it. Some others thought that people in Hollywood helped hide the facts. Elizabeth had met men who worked in movies. Mark Hansen, who owned the address book, was one of them. Some people say he was sick of her asking for money. A few people indicated he wasn't the only one. Someone influential might have wanted her to leave. It's possible that the killer used his medical training to hide behind the glitz and glam of Hollywood. Someone with ties to the police might have made sure the probe didn't go anywhere. There has always been the idea of a cover-up. The case is still open. Years later, modern detectives went back to the location of the crime. They used images that had been improved. They saw weird traces on the ground close to where her body was. Her arms had been bent at the right angles. Her legs were spread out evenly. There was no blood at all. Someone else had slain her. Using a photo transmission gadget called Sound Photo, the FBI found her in just 56 minutes. One of the doctors commented that whoever did this surgery was a really good surgeon. There was no likelihood that the scene would happen. It had been planned. Someone was supposed to find it. The Black Dahlia came out in 2006. Scarlett Johansson was in it. Brian De Palma was in charge of the movie. Making the movie cost $50 million. It made only a little less than that. The disaster terminated De Palma's relationships with big studios. James L. Roy wrote the book that the narrative was based on. His mother had been killed. Some people who read the book thought it was real. The movie was up for an Oscar for cinematography, but it didn't do justice. Elizabeth's family was always in pain. At first, her mother didn't think she was dead. The sorrow got worse when the press exposed private letters from Elizabeth's boyfriends. Elizabeth's sister lived only down the street from where she was slain, but no one ever told her the whole story. Years later, George's son Steve Hodel wrote a book in which he accused his own father. The case file kept becoming bigger and bigger until it reached almost 3,000 pages. There was still no answer.